Thanks everyone for being here. Really excited to go through this. My name's Justin Elszaz. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the city. We're going to talk a little bit today about AI. So first of all, kind of ground everyone in like what is AI? What do we mean by artificial intelligence? What are some of the concerns that artificial intelligence presents? And then maybe taking a quick peek at some opportunities that local government, even ourselves here in Baltimore, are kind of considering. So this song from a rapper named Aesop Rock literally dropped maybe a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And it was incredibly timely because it was right when I started putting together the slide deck for this talk. So I couldn't help but like include a quote from that song. Mindful Solutionism, I think, is the name of the song. But it talks about technology, and I just love this quote. We cannot be trusted with the stuff that we can come up with. The machinery could eat us. We just really love our buttons. But suffice it to say, like really throughout, since the Industrial Revolution, the question of automation and the role of technology in improving quality of life, but also some of the hazards and risks that it represents, it's been there since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and this is certainly a continuation of it. I think there are particular challenges with AI that go beyond just, obviously automation. And we'll try to unpack a little bit of that as we go along. So first off, what is AI? At its root, it's just a computer program that can be trained using data to complete a task. So you have some kind of input. It could be a photograph. It could be a number. An algorithm takes that input and generates a new output. Very basic way of thinking about it. The artificial intelligence algorithm, though, needs to be trained using loads of historical data, as much as you can get. Because what you want to do, and this is similar to how, the human mind kind of learns, is seeing repetition and seeing patterns through repetition. And that's how the AI kind of learns the pattern and is able to take inputs and then predict, a new output. So like I said, this can be a number of things, and these are just a few examples. So when we talk about AI in self-driving cars, or even in like the credit or insurance industries or surveillance, this is at its root all it's really doing. So it's taking that photo of a video or a person, and it's going to label the person, or it's going to take camera information and process it through an algorithm and determine a new direction for the vehicle. Or it might take in things like a home buyer's credit history, their demographics, spending history, maybe their mortgage information, that kind of information, and it's going to predict the likelihood of loan default. This is kind of adopted from the San Francisco's data science team a few years ago, put together kind of a one-pager on like kind of the typologies of problems that AI can solve for cities, finding a needle in a haystack. So let's say you have, a lot of transaction data and you want to find instances of fraud, which are very, very rare, but they're in there somewhere. AI can help detect where those anomalies or fraud are. Or an A/B test. Just a moment ago, it's funny, just like 5-10 minutes ago, I was talking with a colleague about revenue collection for cities. Baltimore has challenges with recouping revenue from things like parking tickets. We don't always recoup all of that revenue. And some cities have tested using A/B tests, which compares basically two options, like a red button and a blue button in an email, or different language, to increase the rate of recouping, what's owed to the city. So maybe it's a hot pink mailer instead of a yellow mailer, and you can test the different language, on the postcards. Or like I said, maybe it's different colors or different texts or labels or photos, or even subject lines. So you might have noticed, like over the past few years, really since it was really the Obama campaign really kind of pushed this to the forefront, but you've noticed that subject lines from companies or from campaigns have gotten less and less formal and more trying to position themselves as either knowing you or having a relationship with you already. That's data driven. That isn't just, like a random trend. They've determined that that's most effective through things like A/B tests. The last one I added on here, which was not part of San Francisco's, is because this has come up in really just the last year or two where this has really exploded, is the ability to generate new content. Now, remember what we talked about a minute ago as far as how AI works. It's still the case that what it's doing is it's taking an input. So if you're writing a prompt into ChatGPT, you can see that as the input. It's going to use a very complex model to then generate the output, which is whatever you requested from ChatGPT. What is different about AI and why should we care? So like I said, some of these concerns, date to the Industrial Revolution. But there are some particular characteristics of AI that make us more concerned, I think, than we have been in the past. We'll cover like sentience and like robot takeover in a minute. But for the time being, like these are the ones that are most relevant right now. So first of all, AI can make a large number of decisions quickly, and the accountability is murky. So if you're automating thousands or millions of decisions, it becomes very difficult to go back to any one decision and understand why that particular decision was made or that recommendation. And when this happens at scale, let's say you're making a decision about, insurance claims or who is eligible for insurance, you could be affecting thousands and thousands of people's livelihoods, really in an instant. So it's scale and speed. Two is it's built using historical data always. We like to think of artificial intelligence being truly artificial, but it's not. It's all been trained on existing data that humans in one way or another created. Even if it's sensors, if it's temperature sensors or sensors, for vibrations on your car, all of these things are things that humans made. They're error prone, they are bias prone. And so, when we're using human generated data, you really have to be considerate of where the biases or errors might come from and how it's going to impact or perpetuate or worsen some of the inequities that were kind of inherent in that data in the first place. And then lastly, again, this is such a new, the generation of new content with AI is really over the last year. And I think it's really, heightened the need to be examining this technology, is that it just completely mudders the waters around what is reality, what is truth, what's an authoritative source, or who actually authors something. If I take a song and like alter the pitch or, maybe change the melody using AI and then put it back on Spotify, like, is it now mine? Is it the original authors? To what extent do I owe Spotify, or what extent do I owe an AI tool or company, some part of royalties if my song really takes off, if I've used AI to generate it? So really complicated questions. I mentioned, the robot takeover and AI sentience. So despite all of the things that we know AI is now capable of, it's generally accepted that we have not yet reached what's called artificial general intelligence. So this is, and there's some sci-fi examples to the right, but this is when it's no longer a computer program that takes an input and generates an output. Now it's able to learn new inputs and new outputs along the way. So for instance, right now, ChatGPT, I can give it some text and it generates some more text. An example of how that would be artificial general intelligence is, maybe I ask it to solve, maybe there's like a complex fluid mechanics problem or something that's in physics or astronomy or something where there are kind of core scientific principles at work. Artificial general intelligence doesn't necessarily understand those concepts. It can just regurgitate combinations of what it's learned in the past. So it's not going to learn physics. It's just going to regurgitate equations or maybe something out of Newton's work, or it's only going to try to pick up patterns and replicate them. It's not going to learn new tasks. So that's a little bit about what is AI and how it works, but wanted to present kind of what are the current concerns and some of the ethical implications. And a lot of these you probably read about almost every day. There's a new article on the front page of New York Times or just about any outlet. Privacy is the obvious one, along with bias. Explainability and labor, I think, are also part of this arena. So I want to touch on each of these in turn. Lots of folks feel a concern around privacy and who is getting a hold of their data and how is it being used. I wanted to offer up maybe some more specific language and concepts around privacy, because it is kind of like it feels kind of like a murky, kind of a cloudy issue. Like you get the sense of who's watching and who's got my data, but having like a more nuanced language of what some of the issues might be, I think can help the conversation. So one is transparency about what is being collected. So do you know, from Facebook or Google or any website that you visit? So on the right, you see an example of, and this was something that Europe effectively mandated that websites do now, is notifying the public of when cookies are being collected, which are like little pieces of data about what you're doing on the internet. Another concept that's really important in the domain of privacy is control. So where is the data going and can it be controlled? In the example that I give here of like whether you can accept or reject particular cookies, Europe, through something called the GDPR, which I'm not going to get into, but effectively mandated this heap of control, which is not everything, but it's a good start. You're able to say, no, I don't want you to collect this particular data, or yes, go ahead and use that data. But we don't always have that kind of full and complete control. Companies like Apple have recognized kind of how this is an issue and have been taking more and more steps. You have more and more control around privacy settings on your phone, for instance, than you used to. Full services. So are you being kind of forced into providing that data so that you can access the services in the first place? So for instance, something like the Google Workspace or like Google tools like Docs and Sheets and slide decks, there's no way of you using Gmail or any of those tools and also being able to opt out of providing the vast majority of your data about how you're using it and what that content is. And then the ability to opt in or opt out, which is kind of similar to control, but like, is it prompting you, do you want to opt into this service? Here are the costs in terms of your data that it's going to take. Bias has been documented for a long time with a lot of algorithms. So this is just one particular example. It was a pretty big one in 2016. ProPublica, the news source, did this really deep investigation of basically a tool that would recommend sentences for criminals, and found that basically it was assessing Black defendants as being much higher risk and more likely to be recidivists than white defendants with essentially the same offenses. And this, again, was because the data that the algorithm was based on was biased in the first place. It was being trained on data, historical data from sentences from years past. And we know that data can be biased because judges, these are people making these decisions. So we know that data is biased. Explainability. Here's another concept that's really important in this kind of world of AI ethics. First of all, what constitutes informed consent? So when you check that accept box for that end user license agreement, the EULA or EULA, have you been properly informed? Do you feel like you understand the concepts of what were in the EULA? And do you understand exactly where things are going? We generally accept that checking that box constitutes informed consent, but these things are so complex that there's no way for you to truly know how your data is being used and how it's informing the AI decision making. And so there's a question of like, are we truly being informed when we provide consent? Another aspect of explainability with these models is kind of the concept of a black box. A lot of the patterns that AI is able to detect, it's really powerful and really sophisticated because it's detecting patterns that otherwise wouldn't be discernible to humans, which means that we don't always understand why the AI is making it. It may be highly, highly accurate, but we don't know why it's making certain decisions. And then here are two more concepts around this that I think are, again, really helpful for the dialogue and just kind of advance the discussion a bit. One is the concept of global explainability. So in general, can you explain how the model works and how it makes its decisions? Local explainability is, and this is really important for governments especially, is can I explain why this one decision was made? So for instance, if you asked Netflix why it recommended, Sex and the City, can you explain, can the company explain, can Netflix explain why your data, and maybe you've never watched anything that was even remotely like Sex and the City, can Netflix go and explain why it recommended that to you? Probably not, because the AI is so sophisticated and picking up patterns that, again, we just won't be able to explain individual decisions. This is especially important for government because things like benefits eligibility or why and how service decisions are being made, how we're optimizing our scarce resources. All of these things are questions that governments get constantly, and residents deserve to know how those decisions are made. If we hand those decisions over to AI, we lose the ability to tell a resident, yeah, this is why we decided this. This is why you aren't eligible for benefits, or this is why, why we put DPW trucks in another neighborhood for this past week. We aren't able to give that specific reason in that case. So it's really difficult for governments to be able to support this. There are a number of labor issues around AI. The obvious one is around the last one that I mentioned here, which is automation. And again, this goes back to the start of the Industrial Revolution about workers being concerned with their jobs being automated and then them no longer having jobs. This is a real concern. A lot has been said on this. If you're interested in, like, this is often called kind of the future of work domain. So there's been lots written about that. One I wanted to highlight, though, is this is number two, which is ghost labor. So like I said, these algorithms need lots and lots of data. So for instance, if I want a model that identifies photos of dogs, I need a lot of images that have labels of dogs that I know are dogs to feed into the algorithm in the first place. We often use very cheap labor in other countries to do that manual labeling. So you might have heard something called Amazon Mechanical Turk. This is kind of a way of, it feels like automation and it feels like AI, but what we're really doing is asking cheap labor to label all this data so that we can go and build AI. So they'll spend hours labeling images. Yes, this is a dog. No, this is not a dog. And again, there's a question of like how fair this is. So there's been a lot written on this as well. I highly recommend a book called Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford for more on the labor issues.